If you are worried you have Lyme disease, or just like the outdoors, and want the peace of mind of knowing whether you have Lyme disease or not, there is a new Lyme screening test based on decades of research by Dr. Richard Marconi, a professor at VCU Medical Center. For more information, visit glymedx.com, that's glymedx.com, or email at info@glymedx.com.
Infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Our discussions on North Korea's military arsenal, nuclear and conventional, has been in headline news lately, particularly with the threats coming from the Hermit Kingdom. I am Robert Harriman, and this is Outbreak News Interviews. Now, North Korea's tight borders make it tough to know a great detail on what their capabilities really are. So what about a bioweapons program? What do we know? What do we not know? Well, joining me now to answer these questions is Sonia Ben Ouagrham-Gormley, PhD. Dr. Ouagrham-Gormley is an associate professor in the Schar School of Policy and Government's Biodefense Program at George Mason University, and the author of Barriers to Bioweapons, The Challenges of Expertise and Organization for Weapons Development. Dr. Ouagrham-Gormley, welcome, ma'am, to the show.
Oh, hi. My pleasure to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, you write in the analysis published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, North Korea's hermetically sealed borders, along with its limited economic and political connections with the rest of the world, make it impossible to verify current or past allegations about the existence of a bioweapons program. So one must be prudent when discussing North Korea and not jump to conclusions or ascribe a threatening meaning to any sliver of information that manages to emerge, particularly when it emerges in a time of crisis. Great advice. Otherwise, the risk of adopting costly policies or engaging in unnecessary conflicts increases. So, Doctor, what exactly do we know about the bioweapons program in North Korea, both historically and the status of one today?
Well, unfortunately, we don't know very much because much of the information that we have so far is based on suspicions rather than concrete evidence. And those suspicions are themselves based sometimes on testimonies by defectors that cannot be verified. And in some cases, those defectors have declared later that they have really no first-hand knowledge of bioweapons activities in North Korea, and that their allegations were based on rumors that they heard. So it's very difficult to make an accurate assessment of the bioweapons threat in North Korea. What we do know is that there is interest in bioweapons development, and that interest probably started in the 60s after then President Kim Il-sung issued the so-called Declaration of Chemicalization, which launched the chemical weapons program and also started bioweapons research. So it is possible, even likely, that North Korea has a research program, potentially a development program, research and development, but it's not clear whether they have transformed this research and development program into a full-scale bioweapons, offensive bioweapons program. Yes?
No, go ahead, ma'am.
So what we need to find out is what is the nature of the R&D program. It is possible that it is simply a defensive research and development program, which means that North Korean scientists would research, analyze, experiment with certain agents, possibly classical agents, that is the agents that are bacteria, viruses that are available in nature. And that's acceptable under the Biological Weapons Convention, which, as you know, it's a convention that banned the development, production, and stockpiling of biological weapons. But it allows research as long as this research concerns agents, types of agents and quantities that are that can be justified for prophylactic purposes or defensive purposes. So the BWC is a bit vague. The language is a bit vague, but in theory, if the program is purely a research and development program for defensive purposes, it is allowed under the BWC. Now, if North Korea developed or transformed this research and development program into a production and weaponization capability, then that becomes banned under the BWC, and we know that North Korea is a member of the signatory of the BWC. So, what does it mean to transform a R&D program into an offensive, large-scale biological weapons program? That means that North Korea would need not only to create the research and production infrastructure, but also it would need to create the weaponization capabilities. And that includes testing sites, indoor, outdoor testing, and the development of delivery mechanisms. And that's one of the most challenging stage of bioweapons development. In the current threat assessments issued by governments and non-government agencies, there are also a lot of suspicions, but no concrete evidence. And a lot of the information comes from the South Korean government, which often lists about 5 facilities that may be part of the biological weapons infrastructure of North Korea. And if you read non-governmental assessments, then you can have up to a dozen other facilities, dual-use facilities that are suspected of potentially being part of the bioweapons program. And they are suspected simply because they are dual-use, not so much because there is clear evidence that they have a bioweapons activity. So really, we don't know very much about the biological weapons program in North Korea. The assessment that exists today are based on suspicions, no concrete evidence, and similar assessments were made, about Cuba, about Iraq, and about Libya's nuclear weapons program. So I think we need to learn more in order to understand whether North Korea has a working biological weapons program.
Yeah, and we see things in the media from time to time, too. And back in April, in the Washington Post, there was a piece, and it said, Bruce Bennett, a national security analyst with the RAND Corporation, said the February assassination of Kim Jong-nam, Kim Jong-un's half-brother, showed that North Korea possesses VX nerve agent, one of the most potent chemical agents. The country also likely has their nerve agent sarin and the ability to wage biological warfare with germs like anthrax, cholera, plague, and smallpox, he said. What are your thoughts on Mr. Bennett's assertion?
Well, Bennett's assessment is also based on the same governmental threat assessments, intelligence assessment that I discuss in my article. That is, those assessments that are based on suspicions and not concrete evidence. So I would say that, I would say the same thing about Bennett's assessment as what I said about previous intelligence assessments. We need more information. We need to gather concrete information about activities in North Korea in order to produce a more accurate assessment of the bioweapons program.
Sure. So if we see articles in the newspaper or on the news, we should take these with a grain of salt.
Right, and we should try to find out what are the sources used in those assessments. And Mr. Bennett's assessment testimony of in 2013 was entirely based on all of these intelligence, U.S., South Korean, Russian assessments of North Korea. And actually, the only assessment that indicated that it is unlikely that North Korea has an offensive bioweapons program was the Russian assessment. They indicated that there are signs of research and development, but no signs of offensive bioweapons activities.
And there's no evidence of Kim using this on his own people or anything like that?
No. There are several defectors indicated that there were tests conducted on prisoners, on children, but again, this information could not be verified.
Sure.
And we have experience with defectors, and one of them is Curveball, the Iraqi defector, who provided information about Iraq's bioweapons program and mobile bioweapons laboratories. And this whole information was used to support the invasion of Iraq under the Bush administration. Mm-hmm. And later on, that information was debunked by the Iraq Survey Group. So I think it's important to be really cautious, particularly in times of crisis.
Sure.
Right.
Okay, let's get a word from our sponsor. Now, for many years, we have been waiting for a Lyme disease test that actually works. After decades of research by Dr. Richard Marconi, a professor at the Medical Center at Virginia Commonwealth University, a breakthrough test has been developed. The GLD test, recently launched by Global Lyme Diagnostics, is based on Dr. Marconi's science. For more information, visit glymedx.com. That's glymedx.com, or email them at info@glymedx.com. All right, Doctor. My next question is: in your analysis, you say that North Korea has a number of shortcomings when it comes to having a truly viable bioweapons program, equipment, expertise, and economic climate, to name a few. Can you elaborate on North Korea's limitations on establishing a functioning program?
Yes. First, it's important to emphasize that what distinguishes bioweapons from other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, like chemical weapons or nuclear weapons, is that biological weapons are based on living microorganisms. And these living microorganisms are very sensitive, and they are sensitive to their environment, they are sensitive to the way they are handled, but they have very unpredictable behaviors. So in order to be able to use these unpredictable, sensitive agents and make them do something specific, that is, kill people in a weapon, you need to acquire certain expertise. And to acquire that expertise, a country has to create a stable work environment where scientists can learn, can accumulate knowledge, and can acquire the technologies, the material, laboratory material required to do this kind of experimentation. And based on my analysis of past bioweapons programs, state bioweapons program, and terrorist bioweapons program, I found that if the country does not provide this stability and continuity of scientific work, then it is unlikely to achieve a working bioweapon. And so what does it mean to have a stable work environment and continuous work environment? It means that there are no issues related to logistics, for example. So in the case of North Korea, there are issues with the electrical supply. And that means that if there are electrical outages on a regular basis, the scientific work will be disrupted, production will be disrupted, and because microorganisms are living agents, they may die because they are not stored or manipulated, or they don't have the proper conditions to survive. Problems with water. You know, in biology, you always need or always use water in experiments. And if the water supply is not continuous, or the water is not safe, or if it is contaminated, then it is going to introduce contamination in an experiment or in a batch of bioagents under production. And that not only delays work, but that can eliminate or that can completely prevent a program from moving forward. Economic issues. If a country cannot afford to acquire the technology and the material required for scientific and technical work, then they will not be able to progress fast, or they may have problems progressing at all. And it's important to know that there is no country in the world that has been able to produce a weapon of mass destruction, whether it is chemical, nuclear, or biological, without foreign support. And that includes technology acquisition. And so if North Korea doesn't have the proper media to do the research or the proper equipment to work on production, they may have to acquire that technology from overseas. And we know that they have been under sanctions for decades. So it is very difficult for a country under sanctions to acquire the technology needed. And they can obtain it, but they have to acquire this technology from different suppliers in order to prevent detection of their activities. And we know that when you acquire technology or laboratory material from different suppliers, that introduces unknown variables in scientific work. And that's true in the chemical field and the nuclear field, but even more so in the biological field, because again, biological weapons are based on living microorganisms. So there are several studies, in the scientific field that show that a change in the pH of the water can have a negative impact on a research project. So one project can work well in a specific environment because the water has a certain pH, and the work cannot be reproduced somewhere else with water because with the water with a different pH. So there are very small changes in the environment, in the material, can have an impact on the agent, and that can eventually delay progress or prevent progress. So these are the kinds of things that are that make the development of bioweapons in the North Korean context unlikely. A working bioweapon in the North Korean context. But there are also organizational and managerial issues to allow the accumulation of knowledge and to allow scientists and technicians to learn over time, especially when a program starts from scratch. That is, there's no bioweapons expertise, prior bioweapons expertise they can rely on. They really need this period of time of knowledge accumulation, learning, experimentation, which includes experimentation with failure in order to learn from failure. And so if you are in an environment that doesn't allow failure, because the government wants the scientists, the teams to produce a certain product or achieve a certain result in a certain period of time, which is often the case in contexts like the North Korean context, where they have a command economy and an authoritarian regime. And so in this kind of environment, scientists do not learn very well, and they're also very tempted to fake positive results or to lie about their achievements. And we've seen that before, even under the Soviet Bioweapons Program. Mm-hmm. We've seen that under the Iraqi program. We've seen that even under the terrorist program, Japanese group Aum Shinrikyo program, where the fear of sanctions by the higher-ups led scientists, technicians to lie and to say that they achieved results that they did not actually achieve.
So is it out of the question, Doctor, to think that North Korea could import the expertise from China or Russia?
No, it's not out of the question. It is possible, but then again, we've seen in past examples that if a team imports expertise from the outside by hiring a scientist or a technician, then there's a problem. There are two problems that they have to face. The first one is to adapt the expertise acquired from outside to the current context. And so let's say a former Soviet scientist is hired by North Korean bioweapons or biotech company in order to help produce a bioweapon. Then the issue would be for that Soviet scientist to know whether the North Korean team has sufficient knowledge to understand his technical language. Do they have the skills required to use the information that he's going to provide them with? And if they don't, then they have to learn. So there's a period of learning. And how long is it going to last? You know, it depends on how low they started, how low was their expertise or their knowledge at the start. And then there's a problem. The second issue is a problem of translation of expertise, of technology to a new environment. And again, there are plenty of studies in the science field that show, including in weapons development, that show that a technology designed in a specific environment cannot be exported in a new environment and used as is. It has to be translated, it has to be adapted to the new environment. And that implies, there's first the question of expertise that I discussed earlier, but that also implies if the knowledge acquired in the Soviet Union was acquired with a specific type of equipment, and then the North Korean program used a different type of equipment, then the Soviet scientist will have to translate or to adapt his expertise to the new environment, to the new technology that is available in North Korea. And that requires also time, because that implies that what he knows needs to be adjusted to the technology that he has at his disposal. And sometimes it's very, very difficult to do. And there were cases where, cases in the scientific field, but also in the weapons field that show that translation sometimes cannot take place if the authors of a weapon or a certain technology are not available to help the translation, that is, the adaptation of that technology to the new context. So the third question would be, who is that scientist acquired from abroad? What kind of knowledge does he have? How essential was his expertise in the original bioweapons program? What stage of the program was he involved in? So, for example, if that individual was involved in research and development of a virus, let's say smallpox, and he's recruited by North Korea, and North Korea is interested in developing an anthrax weapon. Well, the knowledge of the Soviet scientists will not be adapted to the work that the North Korean plan to do. He's a virus expert, and he's going to have to work on bacteria. So in other words, that scientist will have to start learning about bacteria, because his expertise in viruses does not translate in expertise in bacteria.
Right.
So there are, it's feasible, but there are a lot of challenges. And we've seen that in the science field, but also in the bioweapons field, where, for example, in the Soviet context, where scientists from one facility were transferred to another facility, and their expertise could not be used in the new facility because of these issues with translation or adaptation of their knowledge to the new site.
Good point. Okay, Doctor, let's go ahead and sum it up, and I want to go back to the title of your analysis, the article, Potemkin or Real, what is it?
Well, I would say, if I said Potemkin or Real, I would make the same mistake, I think, as the intelligence community that bases information on their assessment on very little information. I think, based on what we know about North Korea and about the North Korean environment, it is unlikely that they have produced a working bioweapon. But we need to learn or to gather more information about the state of their science, the science field. How much expertise is available in North Korea, and is this expertise adapted to the kind of work they want to do? So, just to give you an example, in the Iraq tried to develop anthrax-based and botulinum toxin-based bioweapons. But among their the bioweapons team, there was no expert of anthrax or botulinum toxin. So they had to start learning about these weapons, these agents, to experiment with them. And they ended up, after about 10 years of work, they ended up developing or producing large quantities of liquid agents, but they were not able to dry the agent. They were not able to develop a dissemination mechanism, a delivery mechanism that would have allowed to use these liquid agents as weapons. So we need to learn about the expertise available. We need to learn about the infrastructure. We need to learn about the organization. All these, facilities that may be involved in the bioweapons program, how are they connected to each other? Do people share information? Or are they organized as the Soviet system was, that is very compartmentalized, fragmented, and which means that people did not share information, that they did not share information about their failures or about their expertise, about little tricks that they came up with to achieve a certain result, and that had that created a lot of delays, a lot of failures in the Soviet system. So if the North Korean program is also fragmented and compartmentalized, it is unlikely that it will again achieve positive results. So before we can make an assessment, we really need to gather more information, and that's what is missing today.
Right.
The clear evidence of what is the environment in which the North Koreans are working.
Yeah, and from my viewpoint, that seems like you keep on mentioning we need more information. That seems like that's going to be something very hard to come by with a country that's sealed off the way it is, right?
Yes, it's going to be very difficult,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of defectors, and there are agencies that have some connection with North Korea. I mean, a lot of the North Koreans do a lot of business with the Chinese. So there's a need to create these connections in order to be able to gather information that is going to be useful to make an assessment. Mm-hmm. And also, it is important to know what we are looking for. What kind of information do we need? And so far, most assessments have limited information gathering to material acquisition. What kind of equipment, what kind of potential biotechnology equipment do the North Koreans have? That's not sufficient. We need to learn more about the science, about the expertise, about the organization, the management of science in general, but also potentially the program. And so by expanding the field, the areas of data gathering, information gathering, then we can get some information that can be more helpful in determining whether the program exists and what is its status today.
Well, very good. Very informative. I want to thank you, Dr. Sonia Ben Ouagrham-Gormley, for your time and expertise. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.